The microphone feedback pierced through the gentle murmur of conversation in my backyard. 53 guests had gathered to celebrate what would have been Margaret and my golden wedding anniversary. Even though she had passed away 3 years ago, I wanted to honor our 50 years together. The white tablecloths fluttered in the evening breeze, and the string lights I had carefully hung cast a warm glow over faces I had known for decades. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I watched from my seat at the head table as Evelyn, my 29-year-old daughter, adjusted the microphone with the confidence she had inherited from her mother. Nathan, my son-in-law of 5 years, stood beside her with that practiced smile I had grown to recognize but never quite trust. Something in their demeanor made my stomach tighten, though I couldn't pinpoint why. "Good evening, everyone," Evelyn began, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Nathan and I wanted to take a moment to say something special about Dad." The crowd quieted, forks pausing mid-bite, wine glasses held suspended. I felt a flutter of warmth, thinking perhaps this would be the moment when my daughter finally acknowledged everything I had done for her over the years. "We want to thank Dad for paying for everything tonight, as always," she continued, and I heard a few chuckles from the audience. "But we also want everyone to know that even though Dad is getting older and sometimes needs help with decisions, he won't be living with us because we bought a dog." The laughter that erupted felt like physical blows to my chest. 53 people laughing at my expense, applauding what they thought was a clever joke about my age and dependence. But I knew better. I knew this wasn't a joke at all. This was Evelyn's way of publicly announcing that I was unwanted, that a pet held more value in their household than I did. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my water glass, trying to maintain composure while my world crumbled around me. The blood had drained from my face so completely that Mrs. Henderson from next door leaned over to ask if I was feeling all right. I managed a weak smile and nodded, but inside something fundamental was breaking apart and reforming. In that moment, with the laughter still echoing in my ears, I experienced a clarity that cut through 29 years of denial. Every memory, every interaction, every request for money suddenly aligned into a pattern I had been too blind or too hopeful to see. Evelyn had never loved me as a father. I had been a financial resource, nothing more. And Nathan, who had seemed like such a devoted son-in-law, had simply married into a profitable arrangement. The applause finally died down, and conversations resumed, but I remained frozen in my chair, staring at my daughter as she laughed with Nathan about their successful joke. They didn't even glance in my direction to see how I was handling their public humiliation. That, more than anything else, confirmed what I now understood with devastating clarity. As the evening progressed, I watched the interactions with new eyes. I noticed how Nathan kept checking his phone, how Evelyn's attention drifted whenever I tried to join conversations, how they both became animated only when discussing expensive things they wanted to buy. When old family friends approached to reminisce about Margaret, both Evelyn and Nathan found excuses to drift away, leaving me alone with my grief and memories. By the time the last guest left at 11:30 that night, I'd made a decision that would change everything. I sat in my living room, surrounded by the remnants of a party that was supposed to honor love and commitment, and realized I had been living a lie for years. Margaret would have been horrified by what her daughter had become, and she would have been disappointed in me for enabling it for so long. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at Margaret's old writing desk and began planning what I would later think of as my awakening. For 61 years, I had tried to be the man everyone expected me to be. The generous father, the accommodating widower, the grateful elder who should be thankful for any attention from his family. But that version of Stephen had died during those moments of laughter at my expense. What emerged in its place was someone I had never allowed myself to be. A man who demanded respect, who valued himself, who refused to buy love that should have been freely given. The transformation began that very night, and it would culminate in a way that neither Evelyn nor Nathan could have ever imagined. The morning after the anniversary party, I woke with the kind of mental clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The humiliation from the previous night had burned away something that had been clouding my judgment for far too long. I made coffee in the kitchen where Margaret and I had shared thousands of quiet mornings, and I began to systematically review my relationship with Evelyn and Nathan with the dispassionate eye of someone examining evidence. The first thing I did was retrieve my financial records from the past 5 years. Margaret had always handled our bookkeeping, but after her death I had taken over reluctantly. Now I spread the bank statements, cancelled checks, and credit card bills across the dining room table like a detective laying out clues to a crime. What I found made my stomach turn. In the 5 years since Nathan had entered our family, I had given them over $47,000. Not loaned, given. There had been the $10,000 for their wedding, which I had been honored to provide. Then the $8,000 to help with Nathan's business opportunity that never materialized. The $5,000 for their honeymoon extension because they deserved to celebrate properly. The monthly payments that started small, $500 here, $700 there, but had grown to a steady $1,500 every month for the past year. Each request had come with a story. Nathan's job was temporarily cutting hours. Evelyn's promotion was delayed due to budget constraints. Their car needed emergency repairs. Their apartment rent had unexpectedly increased. Nathan's mother was sick and needed help with medical bills. The stories were always delivered with just the right amount of desperation and gratitude, always accompanied by promises that this would be the last time, that they would pay me back when things improved. But as I sat there looking at the numbers, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. Their financial emergencies always seemed to coincide with their desire for something expensive. The month they needed help with rent was the same month Nathan posted photos on social media of his new motorcycle. The period when Evelyn was struggling with reduced hours at work was when she was posting pictures of weekend trips to expensive resorts. I walked to my computer and for the first time in years really looked at their social media profiles. What I found there was like viewing my life through a funhouse mirror. While I had been living modestly, carefully managing my retirement savings and Margaret's life insurance, Nathan and Evelyn had been living like people with unlimited resources. Designer clothes, expensive restaurants, weekend getaways, concert tickets, sporting events. The life they were actually living bore no resemblance to the financial struggles they presented to me, but the money, I realized, was just the surface. The deeper pattern was one of manipulation, disguised as concern. After Margaret's death, when I was most vulnerable and lost, Evelyn had gradually positioned herself as my caretaker and advisor. She had convinced me to add her name to my checking account, just in case of emergencies. She had talked me into giving her a key to the house, so she could check on me when I wasn't answering the phone. She had slowly taken control of decisions about my health care, my social activities, even my daily routines. What I had interpreted as love and concern had actually been a systematic effort to make me dependent on her, while simultaneously extracting maximum financial benefit from our relationship. The monthly visits that I treasured were always brief and always included requests for money. The phone calls I looked forward to were actually status checks to ensure I wasn't making any financial decisions without consulting her. I remembered the day 6 months ago when I had mentioned wanting to take a cruise, something Margaret and I had always planned to do but never managed. Evelyn's reaction had been immediate and strong. "Dad, do you really think that's wise at your age? What if something happens to you? What if you get confused in a foreign port?" She had painted such a vivid picture of potential disasters that I had abandoned the idea entirely, grateful for her protective concern. Now I understood that her opposition hadn't been about my safety, it had been about the money. A cruise would have cost several $1,000s, money that wouldn't be flowing into their accounts. Every time I expressed interest in spending money on myself, there was always a reason why it was impractical, risky, or unnecessary. Every time they needed money, there was always a reason why helping them was the responsible, loving thing to do. The pattern extended beyond money into every aspect of our relationship. My friends from church, my neighbors, even my doctor, Evelyn had systematically positioned herself as the filter through which all my relationships flowed. She had convinced me that I was becoming forgetful, that I might say inappropriate things, that people might take advantage of me if she wasn't there to protect me. Gradually, I had stopped making independent social plans, stopped having friends over, stopped engaging with the community I had been part of for decades. As I sat there surrounded by evidence of my own blind naivety, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anger, not the momentary irritation of daily frustrations, but a deep righteous fury at how completely I had been manipulated. But underneath the anger was something even more powerful: determination. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt like myself again. And that self was not going to be a victim anymore. That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to my lawyer, James Morrison, who had handled Margaret's will and our estate planning for over 20 years. The second was to David Chen, the private investigator Margaret and I had used years ago when we suspected our previous accountant of embezzling. The third was to Dr. Patricia Williams, a geriatric psychiatrist who had been recommended by my physician for a completely different reason than what Evelyn thought. By 5 o'clock that evening, I had appointments scheduled that would give me the tools I needed for what I was already thinking of as my liberation. Nathan and Evelyn thought they were dealing with a confused, dependent old man who could be manipulated indefinitely. They were about to discover that they had gravely underestimated Stephen Thompson. The game was about to change, and this time I would be the one setting the rules. Over the next few days, as I waited for my appointments with the lawyer and private investigator, I found myself revisiting memories that had taken on an entirely different meaning. What I had once interpreted as love and concern now revealed itself as a carefully orchestrated campaign of emotional manipulation that had begun almost immediately after Margaret's funeral. I remembered the day, just 2 weeks after we buried Margaret, when Evelyn had sat me down in this very living room and gently suggested that I might be struggling more than I realized. She had pointed to small things, a couple of unpaid bills that had slipped my attention during my grief, my forgetting to return a phone call from the insurance company, my wearing the same clothes for several days in a row. At the time, I had been grateful for her observation and support. Now I understood it had been the opening move in a long-term strategy. "Dad, I'm worried about you," she had said, taking my hands in hers with tears in her eyes. "Mum handled so many things that you might not even realize. What if you forget to pay something important? What if someone tries to take advantage of you when you're vulnerable? I think it would give us all peace of mind if I could help you with some of the practical stuff." That conversation had led to her name being added to my checking account, then to her having copies of all my important documents, then to her insisting that she review any significant purchases or decisions with me first. I had felt cared for, protected, loved. I had been grateful to have such a devoted daughter during the darkest period of my life, but now I could see the calculation behind every gesture. The way she had carefully documented every small mistake I made in those early months of grief, building a case for my incompetence. The way she had gradually isolated me from the support systems that might have helped me heal and regain my independence. The way she had positioned herself as my sole source of practical help, while simultaneously creating more and more reasons why I needed that help. I remembered the incident with Mrs. Patterson from down the street. She had been bringing me meals twice a week and staying to chat, which had been one of the few bright spots in those difficult months. But Evelyn had expressed concern that Mrs. Patterson might be taking advantage of my gratitude. She had pointed out that Mrs. Patterson always seemed to compliment my house, my furniture, my possessions. "I'm not saying she has bad intentions, Dad, but lonely widows can sometimes become targets for people who see an opportunity." I had started viewing Mrs. Patterson's kindness through this lens of suspicion, eventually declining her offers of help and companionship. Only now did I realize that Evelyn had been eliminating anyone who might provide me with emotional support or practical advice that didn't come through her. Mrs. Patterson hadn't been scheming. She had been genuinely trying to help a grieving neighbor, but her presence had threatened Evelyn's position as my primary caregiver and advisor. The pattern had extended to every relationship in my life. My longtime friend Frank, who had suggested I might want to consider dating again after a year of mourning, was suddenly characterized by Evelyn as inappropriate and not understanding the depth of your commitment to Mom. My brother Robert, who lived across the country but called regularly, was painted as interfering and not understanding your daily reality when he suggested I might benefit from grief counseling. Even my doctor, Dr. Martinez, who had suggested that I seemed to be doing well and encouraged me to resume activities I enjoyed, was subtly undermined when Evelyn began accompanying me to appointments and describing symptoms and concerns I had never mentioned. Each person who might have provided an outside perspective on my life and well-being had been systematically discredited or driven away. I had been left dependent on Evelyn and Nathan for social contact, emotional support, and practical advice. It was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, and I had been completely blind to it. But perhaps the most painful memories to revisit were the moments when I had tried to assert independence or express dissatisfaction, only to be met with such skilled manipulation that I'd ended up apologizing for my own feelings. Like the time I had suggested that their monthly financial requests were becoming burdensome, and Evelyn had burst into tears. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she had sobbed. "I know we're asking too much. It's just that Nathan is so proud, and it kills him to have to ask for help. We've been trying so hard to make it on our own, but everything is so expensive now. I told him we shouldn't keep asking you, but he said you would want to help family. I guess we misunderstood. We'll figure something else out." The guilt had been overwhelming. Here was my daughter struggling financially, feeling terrible about asking for help, and I had made her feel worse by complaining about providing it. I had immediately reassured her that of course I wanted to help, that family was the most important thing, that I was sorry for making her feel bad about asking. I had increased their monthly allowance by $200 that very day. Now I could see the manipulation for what it had been. The tears, the self-deprecation, the appeal to family loyalty, the suggestion that I was being unreasonable or uncaring. It had all been carefully designed to make me feel guilty for having boundaries. Every time I had tried to assert any independence or express any dissatisfaction, I had been made to feel selfish, unreasonable, or uncaring until I retreated back into compliance. The most devastating realization was how completely I had been rewritten in their narrative. In their version of reality, I was a confused, lonely old man who needed constant guidance and support. They were the devoted family members who sacrificed their own needs to care for me. My financial contributions weren't seen as generosity from a loving father. They were seen as the least I could do to repay them for their burden of caring for me. I thought about all the family gatherings where I had felt like an outsider, all the conversations that stopped when I entered the room, all the decisions that were made for my own good without my input. I had attributed it to the natural changes that come with aging, to the family dynamic shifting after Margaret's death. But now I understood that I had been systematically marginalized and diminished in my own family. The anger I felt was unlike anything I had experienced in my 61 years, but it wasn't the helpless rage of a victim. It was the focused fury of someone who had finally understood the game being played against him and was ready to play by different rules. Margaret had raised Evelyn to be strong and independent, but somewhere along the way our daughter had decided that strength meant taking advantage of others rather than building her own life with integrity. As I sat in Margaret's chair that evening, looking at our wedding photo on the mantel, I made her a promise. I would not let our daughter continue to dishonor the values we had tried to instill in her. I would not continue to enable behavior that was ultimately destroying her character while it destroyed my dignity. And I would not spend my remaining years as a victim of manipulation disguised as love. The appointments I had scheduled were just the beginning. By the time I was finished, Evelyn and Nathan would understand that their victim had become their opponent, and unlike them, I intended to fight fair, but I also intended to win. 3 days after my revelation, I sat in the office of David Chen, the private investigator who had helped Margaret and me years earlier. His office hadn't changed much. Still the same cluttered desk, still the same wall of commendations and licenses, still the same direct manner that had impressed us when we had needed his services before. "Stephen, I have to say what you've described sounds like a textbook case of elder financial abuse," David said, reviewing the notes he had taken during my explanation. "The gradual isolation, the systematic dependency creation, the emotional manipulation tied to financial requests, it's all there. But you mentioned you suspect there might be more to Nathan's story specifically." I nodded, feeling more focused and determined than I had in years. Something about him has never felt right. The stories he tells about his background don't always add up. His work history seems vague, and I've noticed he's very secretive about his phone and computer use. David leaned back in his chair. What kind of inconsistencies? I had prepared for this question, having spent the previous evening writing down every detail I could remember about Nathan's various stories. He told us he grew up in Colorado, but once he mentioned attending a high school football game in Nevada when he was 16. He said his father died when he was young, but last Christmas he accidentally mentioned calling his father about some car trouble. He claims he's in sales, but he never seems to have a consistent schedule, and I've never seen any company car, business cards, or sales materials. Interesting. And you mentioned phone calls where he steps outside or goes to another room? All the time. And he gets defensive if anyone asks who he was talking to. He claims it's work calls, but they happen at strange hours, weekends, late evenings, early mornings. Sometimes I hear him talking in what sounds like a completely different tone of voice, more gentle and familiar than he ever uses with Evelyn. David was taking careful notes. Stephen, I need to ask you something directly. Are you prepared for the possibility that what I find might be very upsetting? If Nathan is hiding something significant, it could affect Evelyn as well, and that might complicate your family situation even further. I had been thinking about this exact question since I first decided to hire David. My family situation is already complicated, I said. The difference is that now I'm choosing to understand exactly how complicated it is, rather than pretending everything is fine while I'm being manipulated and taken advantage of. David smiled slightly. Fair enough. Give me 2 weeks. I'll do a comprehensive background check on Nathan. Employment history, financial records, criminal background, social media analysis, and surveillance if necessary. If there are secrets, I'll find them. That evening, I met with James Morrison, my attorney, in his downtown office. James had been practicing law for over 30 years, and his calm professionalism had helped Margaret and me through various legal matters over the decades. But I had never seen him look as concerned as he did when I finished explaining my situation. Stephen, I need to be direct with you, James said, removing his glasses and cleaning them slowly, a gesture I recognized as his way of organizing his thoughts before delivering difficult news. What you're describing constitutes elder abuse, both financial and emotional. But more immediately concerning is the level of access Evelyn has to your accounts and legal documents. He pulled out a thick file that I recognized as containing all my legal documents. Let's review exactly what permissions you've given her over the past 3 years. The list was longer and more comprehensive than I had realized. Evelyn had power of attorney for financial decisions if I became incapacitated. She was joint owner on my primary checking account. She was the primary beneficiary on my life insurance policies. She had keys to my house, copies of all my important documents, and access to my safety deposit box. Most concerning of all, I had signed a healthcare directive that gave her the authority to make medical decisions for me if I became unable to do so myself. James, when I signed these documents, I thought I was being responsible and making things easier for my daughter if something happened to me. But now I'm worried about what she might be able to do with this level of access while I'm still perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. James nodded grimly. Your concerns are valid. With these documents, Evelyn could potentially have you declared incompetent, gain full control of your finances, and make decisions about your living situation and medical care. The financial power of attorney doesn't take effect unless you're incapacitated, but the joint account access and healthcare directive could be misused. The blood drained from my face as I realized how vulnerable I had made myself. What can I do? We can revoke or modify most of these documents, but we need to be strategic about it. If Evelyn suspects you're taking away her access, she might try to act quickly to use the authorities she currently has. I've seen cases where adult children have had their parents committed for psychiatric evaluation to prevent them from changing their wills or revoking powers of attorney. The thought that my own daughter might have me committed to protect her financial interests was terrifying, but given everything I had learned about her true nature, it wasn't impossible to imagine. What do you recommend? First, we quietly remove her from your checking account and open new accounts at a different bank. Second, we draft a new will and new powers of attorney, but we don't execute them until we're ready to make all the changes simultaneously. Third, we arrange for you to have an independent psychiatric evaluation to document your mental competency. If anyone tries to claim you're not capable of making these decisions, we'll have professional documentation that you are. I left James's office with a clear action plan, but also with a sobering understanding of how much danger I had unknowingly placed myself in. The daughter I had trusted with my life and future had the legal authority to take both away from me, but I also left with something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of agency over my own life. 2 weeks later, David Chen called with results that exceeded even my worst suspicions about Nathan. When I arrived at his office, he had a thick folder waiting for me, along with a box of tissues that suggested I was going to need them. Stephen, I need you to sit down for this, David began. Nathan Weber, and that's not even his real name, by the way, is not just hiding one secret. He's hiding an entire second life. David opened the folder and began laying out photographs and documents like a prosecutor presenting evidence. His real name is Nathan Mitchell. He's been married for 8 years to a woman named Sarah Mitchell in Phoenix, Arizona. They have 2 children together, a 6-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son. His marriage to Evelyn isn't just morally invalid, it's legally invalid. Nathan is a bigamist. The room seemed to spin around me as I stared at the photographs David had placed in front of me. Nathan looking completely natural and happy, with his arms around a pretty blonde woman and 2 small children who had his eyes and smile. Nathan at birthday parties, school events, family barbecues, living a completely different life just a few states away. "How is this possible?" I whispered. "Nathan works in sales, but not the way he told your family. He's a traveling pharmaceutical sales representative, which gives him a perfect cover for spending weeks away from both families. He tells Sarah he's on extended business trips, and he tells Evelyn he's visiting his sick mother or dealing with work emergencies in other states. The money you've been giving him through Evelyn has been supporting his real family while he plays house with your daughter." David pulled out bank records and financial documents. He's been incredibly systematic about it. He maintains completely separate financial lives, separate social media accounts, separate phone numbers. Sarah Mitchell believes she's married to a devoted family man who travels for work. Evelyn believes she's married to a man with a difficult family situation and work challenges. Neither woman knows the other exists. The betrayal was so enormous that I couldn't process it all at once. My daughter wasn't just married to a man who was using her for money. She was married to a man who was using her as his secondary life while maintaining a primary family elsewhere. Every moment of their marriage had been a lie. Every family gathering, every holiday, every intimate conversation, all of it built on a foundation of complete deception. "There's more," David continued gently. "Nathan's been doing this for years. Before Sarah, there was another woman in Denver who also thought she was married to him. Before that, a woman in Portland. This is his pattern. He finds financially stable women or women with wealthy families, maintains relationships with them while keeping his real life completely separate, and moves on when the situation becomes too complicated or stops being profitable." I stared at the evidence spread across David's desk, my mind reeling with the implications. Evelyn wasn't just a victim of her own greed and manipulation, she was also a victim of an elaborate con game. But she was a victim who had made me her victim in turn. The situation was more complex than I had imagined, but it was also more clear-cut than I had hoped. Nathan wasn't just a user and manipulator, he was a criminal. And very soon, both he and Evelyn were going to discover that their carefully constructed house of lies was about to come crashing down around them. 1 month after my humiliation at the anniversary party, I had arranged for a second gathering at my house. I told Evelyn I wanted to have a small family meeting to discuss some important decisions about my future. What I didn't tell her was that I had invited several other people who would be very interested in those decisions: my lawyer James Morrison, David Chen, the private investigator, and Detective Maria Santos from the fraud division of the police department. Evelyn and Nathan arrived at 7 o'clock on that Friday evening, both looking slightly annoyed at having their weekend plans interrupted by what they clearly expected to be another tedious conversation about my healthcare wishes or living arrangements. They settled into the living room with the air of people humoring a difficult elderly relative. "Dad, we really appreciate you wanting to include us in your planning," Evelyn began in the patronizing tone I had grown to despise. "Nathan and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to consider some changes that would make things easier for everyone." "Oh," I replied, maintaining the mild, slightly confused demeanor they expected from me. "What kind of changes?" Nathan leaned forward with what I now recognized as his practiced expression of concerned helpfulness. "Well, Stephen, this house is really getting too big for you to manage alone. And some of your neighbors have mentioned to Evelyn that they're worried about you. Mrs. Patterson said she saw you looking confused in your driveway last week. It was fascinating to watch them build their case using fabricated evidence. Mrs. Patterson, who I had recently reconnected with after understanding how Evelyn had manipulated me into avoiding her, had said no such thing, but they needed to establish a pattern of incompetence to justify whatever they were planning to propose. The thing is, Dad," Evelyn continued, "we've been looking into some really nice assisted living communities, places where you'd have company, activities, meals prepared for you. You wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this big house or managing all your financial responsibilities. And the best part, Nathan added, is that we could handle selling the house and managing the proceeds for you, so you wouldn't have to deal with all those complicated decisions. There it was. The end game I had suspected, but hoped I was wrong about. They wanted me declared incompetent so they could sell my house, manage my money, and warehouse me in an institution where I would be completely under their control. The $47,000 they had already extracted from me was just the beginning. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering their proposal. That's very thoughtful of you both. But before we make any big decisions, I think there are some things we need to discuss as a family. The doorbell rang and I stood up slowly, maintaining my performance of elderly frailty. Oh, that must be the lawyer I asked to come by. I thought it would be good to have professional advice about some of these decisions. Evelyn and Nathan exchanged glances. They weren't concerned yet. Having a lawyer present would actually help them if they were planning to have me declared incompetent. They probably assumed I had asked James to help me understand their proposal. When I returned with James, David Chen, and Detective Santos, the atmosphere in the room changed immediately. Nathan's face went pale as his eyes darted between the three newcomers, while Evelyn looked confused but not yet alarmed. "Evelyn, Nathan," I said, my voice stronger and clearer than they had heard it in months, "I'd like you to meet Detective Santos from the Police Fraud Division and David Chen, a private investigator. I believe you already know James Morrison, my attorney." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Nathan's face cycle through confusion, recognition, and barely controlled panic as he realized that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Detective Santos stepped forward first. "Mr. Mitchell, and yes, we know that's your real name, you're under arrest for bigamy, fraud, and identity theft." She began reading him his rights while Nathan sat frozen in shock. Evelyn's voice cracked as she struggled to understand what was happening. "Dad, what is this? What's going on? Nathan, what is she talking about?" I sat down across from my daughter, looking directly into her eyes for what felt like the first time in years. "Evelyn, Nathan has been lying to you about everything. His real name is Nathan Mitchell. He's already married to another woman in Arizona, and they have 2 children together. You've never been legally married to him." David Chen opened his folder and placed photographs on the coffee table. Images of Nathan with his real family, documents showing his real identity, bank records detailing how the money I had given them had been sent to support his actual wife and children. "This can't be real," Evelyn whispered, picking up one of the photographs with trembling hands. "Nathan, tell them this is some kind of mistake." But Nathan wasn't talking. He was staring at the evidence with the expression of a man watching his life implode. The confident, charming man who had manipulated both of us for years had been reduced to silence by the weight of his exposed lies. "There's more, Evelyn," I continued, my voice steady despite the pain I felt at seeing my daughter's world shatter. "Nathan isn't the only one who's been living a lie. I know about the $47,000 you've taken from me over the past 5 years. I know about your plans to have me declared incompetent, so you could sell my house and control my finances. I know about the lies you've told my friends and neighbors about my mental state." Detective Santos had finished arresting Nathan and was now addressing Evelyn. "Miss Thompson, you're also under investigation for elder financial abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud. We'll need you to come to the station for questioning." Evelyn looked between me and the detective, her face a mixture of shock, betrayal, and dawning understanding. "Dad, I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I was helping you. I thought Nathan loved me." For a moment, looking at my daughter's tear-stained face, I felt the familiar pull of guilt and the urge to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But then I remembered the laughter at my anniversary party, the years of manipulation, the systematic effort to isolate and control me. The woman sitting across from me crying wasn't a victim. She was someone who had victimized me for years while believing she deserved to do so. "Evelyn, you weren't helping me," I said quietly. "You were helping yourself to my money, my dignity, and my independence. The fact that Nathan was using you doesn't excuse what you did to me." 3 months later, I sat on the porch of my new home, a charming 2-bedroom cottage in an active senior community 40 minutes from my old neighborhood. It was smaller than the house Margaret and I had shared, but it was perfect for my needs, and more importantly, it was mine, free and clear. The legal proceedings had moved faster than I expected. Nathan had been extradited to Arizona to face charges there as well, and his case had become a cautionary tale about romance fraud that made national news. Evelyn had been sentenced to community service, and ordered to pay restitution, though she had no realistic way to repay the money she had taken from me over the years. But the money had never been the point. The point had been reclaiming my dignity, my autonomy, and my right to live my life on my own terms. And in that regard, I had succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. Mrs. Patterson had helped me pack my belongings and had cried when I told her I was moving. "Stephen, I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening to you," she had said. "I should have tried harder to stay in touch after Evelyn made it clear I wasn't welcome." "You couldn't have known," I had assured her. "I didn't even know, and I was living it every day." My new community was everything I had hoped for, and nothing like the institutional nightmare Evelyn and Nathan had tried to convince me I needed. My neighbors were active, intelligent people who treated me as an equal rather than a burden. I had joined the community garden committee, started taking watercolor classes, and had even signed up for that cruise Margaret and I had always planned to take. The most unexpected development had been my friendship with Harold, a 73-year-old widower who lived 2 houses down. Harold had lost his wife 4 years ago and understood the particular challenges of rebuilding a life after decades of marriage. Unlike my relationship with Evelyn and Nathan, my friendship with Harold was based on mutual respect, shared interests, and genuine care for each other's well-being. "You know what I admire most about what you did?" Harold had said to me one evening as we sat on my porch watching the sunset. "It wasn't the detective work or the legal maneuvering. It was the courage to admit you had been wrong about people you loved and to act on that knowledge even when it was painful." Harold was right. The hardest part hadn't been exposing Nathan's crimes or even confronting the financial abuse. The hardest part had been accepting that my own daughter had been willing to sacrifice my dignity and independence for money, that the relationship I had treasured and protected for 29 years had been largely one-sided. But as difficult as that realization had been, it had also been liberating. For the first time since Margaret's death, I was living for myself rather than trying to earn love from people who saw me only as a resource to be exploited. I was making decisions based on what would make me happy rather than what would keep others from being angry with me. Evelyn had tried to contact me several times after the legal proceedings ended. Her letters were full of apologies, explanations, and requests for forgiveness. She painted herself as a victim of Nathan's manipulation, which was partially true, but not entirely relevant to how she had treated me. Nathan's deception didn't excuse years of financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and systematic isolation. I had written her back once, a brief letter explaining that while I forgave her for my own peace of mind, I had no interest in rebuilding our relationship. The daughter I had loved and trusted had never really existed. The real Evelyn was someone who was capable of cruelty disguised as care, manipulation disguised as love. I wished her well in building a better life, but I would not be part of that life. The money from selling my old house had given me financial security I hadn't expected. After buying my cottage outright, I still had enough left to travel, pursue hobbies, and live comfortably for the rest of my life without worrying about every expense. More importantly, I had control over every dollar, every decision, every aspect of my daily existence. On this particular evening, as I sat reading a book about Mediterranean cruises and planning my itinerary for next month's trip, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. 6 months ago, I had been a lonely, manipulated man living in fear of becoming a burden to his family. Tonight, I was a free man making plans for adventures and looking forward to tomorrow. Margaret would have been proud of the man I had become, not because I had exposed wrongdoing or protected my assets, but because I had finally learned to value myself enough to demand the respect I deserved. She had always believed I was stronger than I knew. It had taken me 61 years and a devastating betrayal to discover she was right. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of the sunsets Margaret and I used to watch from our old porch. But unlike those memories, this sunset belonged entirely to me, and tomorrow's sunrise would too.